The Mothman is usually remembered as a piece of West Virginia folklore, but for the people of Point Pleasant in 1966, it wasn't a legend. It was a physical presence that defied the laws of nature. The mystery begins with a contradiction. How does a biological creature keep pace with a car traveling 100 miles per hour without ever flapping its wings? This is a question of whether something from outside our understanding of biology entered a small river town to signal a coming disaster. On November 15, 1966, at about 11:30 p.m., two young couples were driving through the darkness of Mason County. Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Mellette, were near the Old North Power Plant, right on the edge of what locals called the TNT area. And if late-night mysteries like this are your kind of rabbit hole, like the video and subscribe to Sleepwalk Files. This was a massive stretch of land, about 8,000 acres, filled with the ruins of World War II munitions factories, concrete igloos, and rusted towers where teenagers often hung out. As Roger slowed the car, they saw something standing by the old generator building. It was shaped like a man, but it was enormous, standing over 7 feet tall. It was gray, with large wings folded against its back. Then the creature turned toward them, its eyes ignited into two massive, glowing red circles. Linda Scarberry later described it as a slender, muscular man, but she couldn't see a face because the glow of those eyes had a hypnotic effect on her. Panic set in. The couples floored it, hitting speeds of 100 miles per hour down Route 62. Mary Mellette was screaming and Linda was praying, but the creature didn't fall behind. It flew after them, emitting a piercing screech. This is how believers imagine the terrifying high-speed chase unfolding along Route 62. The creature glided effortlessly beside the car, maintaining a steady pace that defied all known laws of avian flight. It didn't flap its wings to stay airborne. It glided, effortless and steady, keeping pace with the car just 10 feet above the road. Steve Mellette later told police that the thing didn't even seem to be trying. It pursued them all the way to the Point Pleasant city limits before finally peeling off and vanishing into the dark over the river. The four of them didn't go home to sleep it off. They went straight to the Mason County Courthouse to report what they had seen. They were met by Deputy Millard Holstead. Police are used to pranksters or people who have had a few too many drinks at a lover's lane, but Holstead noticed something different about this group. He later noted that the witnesses were genuinely terrified. Their fear wasn't the kind you can fake for a joke. It was a deep, visceral shock. This official report changed the nature of the event. It was a documented police record. When authorities acknowledge that witnesses are in a state of genuine trauma, it suggests that the stimulus, the creature, was real enough to trigger a fight-or-flight response that the human brain doesn't usually activate for a trick of the light. The next morning, the story moved from the police blotter to the printing press. On November 16th, the Point Pleasant Register published the first newspaper report. The headline was hesitant, reflecting the confusion of the town. Couples see man-sized bird. Creature, something. By using those three different words, bird, creature, something, the paper admitted that the witnesses couldn't categorize what they had seen. It wasn't a large owl or a stray crane. It was something that didn't fit into any known box. Once the report hit the stands, the floodgates opened. The community stopped wondering if the Scarberrys and Mellettes were crazy and started wondering if they were the only ones who had seen it. Within days, more people came forward with their own stories. 2 volunteer firemen reported a large bird with red eyes. A contractor named Newell Partridge claimed that when he shone a flashlight into a nearby field, he saw eyes that glowed exactly like bicycle reflectors. He even attributed the disappearance of his German Shepherd, Bandit, and strange buzzing noises coming from his television to the creature biological explanations usually step in here. Later, a wildlife biologist from West Virginia University suggested that everyone was actually seeing sandhill cranes. These are huge birds nearly as tall as a man with reddish skin around their eyes. If a few of them had wandered off their migration route, A frightened person in the dark might mistake them for a monster. But a crane cannot glide at 100 miles per hour alongside a speeding car. A crane does not cause a level of terror that leaves 4 adults shaken at a police station. The biological explanation covers the appearance, but it doesn't cover the behavior. If this was a misplaced bird, why did it seem to be hunting the car? And why did it choose the TNT area, a place of concrete bunkers and military secrets, as its hunting ground? As the sightings increased, Point Pleasant began to feel like it was being watched. The creature was lingering. The question shifted from, what is it, to why is it here? The first report from the TNT area was a shock, but it could have been a fluke. Maybe those 2 couples were just panicked. But in the days and weeks that followed, the sightings scaled. Over 100 people came forward. This wasn't a group of teenagers looking for a thrill in the woods. The witnesses included a World War II veteran, a commercial pilot, and 2 local firemen. These are people trained to observe, people who know the difference between a trick of the light and a physical object, and they were all describing the same thing: a 7-foot-tall humanoid, gray or brown, with massive wings folded against its back. Most strikingly, they all mention the eyes, 2 glowing red circles set into the shoulders where a head should have been. When 100 different people from different walks of life describe the same specific anatomy, it stops looking like a series of hallucinations. It looks like a shared visual experience. If it were mass hysteria, you'd expect the descriptions to drift and become more vague as the story spread. Instead, the details stayed rigid. The creature was always huge, it was always winged, and it always had those red eyes. This consistency is what pushed the town past curiosity and into a state of genuine alarm. People weren't just seeing a strange bird. They felt they were dealing with a predator. One of those people was a building contractor named Newell Partridge. He was out in a field in Mason County when he encountered the creature. Partridge described the eyes not as a soft glow, but as something piercing, like bicycle reflectors caught in a beam of light. But for him, the sighting wasn't just a visual anomaly. He had his dog, a German shepherd named Bandit, with him. According to Partridge, Bandit chased something into the darkness. The dog didn't come back. He claimed the creature was responsible for the disappearance of his pet. This changed the narrative in Point Pleasant. The creature wasn't just a silent observer or a ghostly figure gliding over the highway. It was now perceived as an active, predatory presence in the environment. It wasn't just watching the town, it was taking things from it. This is where the biological explanations started to fall apart. A biologist named Dr. Robert Smith suggested that people were actually seeing sandhill cranes. These are large birds, about 5 feet tall, with red patches near their eyes. On paper, it sounds plausible, but the witnesses pointed out a fatal flaw in that logic. A crane has to flap its wings constantly to stay in the air. It cannot glide effortlessly alongside a car doing 100 miles per hour. And more importantly, a bird's eye reflects light. It doesn't generate its own glow in total darkness. The creature wasn't a bird and it wasn't a prank. Then the town was facing something that didn't fit into any known textbook. The sightings were no longer confined to the abandoned bunkers of the TNT area. The entity was moving into the fields and the residential streets. The fear began to settle into the bones of the community. It wasn't just about what was lurking in the woods anymore. People started reporting things that happened inside their own homes. They spoke of mechanical, distorted voices on the phone and a heavy feeling of dread that wouldn't lift. The creature had established its presence, and now it seemed to be communicating. When the stories started hitting the local papers, the experts stepped in to provide a rational answer. Robert L. Smith, a wildlife biologist at West Virginia University, looked at the reports and found a perfect biological match. He pointed to the sandhill crane. If you've never seen one, a sandhill crane is a massive American bird. They can stand almost as tall as a man and have a wingspan that reaches 7 feet. They also have a distinct reddish coloring around their eyes. To a biologist, this was an open and shut case. The crane isn't native to that part of West Virginia. but birds get blown off course during migration all the time. Smith's explanation was that a confused, oversized bird had wandered into Mason County, and the locals, who had never seen one, were mistaking a misplaced animal for a monster. On paper, it fits. You have a 7-foot creature with red eyes and huge wings. It's a concrete, biological explanation that removes the need for ghosts or aliens. But when you hold the biology of a crane up against the actual testimony of the witnesses, the explanation starts to crack. Think about the night Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallett fled the TNT area. They weren't glancing at a bird in a field, they were driving down Route 62 at 100 miles per hour. They reported that the creature pursued them. Steve Mallett later told police that the thing didn't even seem to be trying. It glided 10 feet above the road, keeping pace with a speeding car without ever flapping its wings. That is where the science fails. A sandhill crane is a heavy bird to stay airborne. Especially while accelerating to 100 miles per hour, it has to flap. It cannot simply glide at highway speeds. Then there's the light. Biologists explain the red eyes as natural pigmentation, or the way a bird's eye reflects a flashlight, like the bicycle reflectors described by the contractor Newell Partridge. But the witnesses described something different. They didn't see a reflection of their own headlights. They saw eyes that ignited. They saw a glow that persisted in total darkness, a hypnotic red light that Linda Scarberry said made it impossible to even see the creature's face. This was a crane. The physics don't work. A bird cannot outrun a car without effort, and a bird's eye cannot generate its own light. This leaves a gap. If the biological explanation is wrong, then the witnesses weren't misidentifying an animal. They were seeing something that doesn't follow the rules of nature. If the creature wasn't a bird, then the wings weren't for flight in the way we understand it. It suggests that the physical form of the Mothman was a disguise, or perhaps a version of biology we don't have a name for. This shift in thinking changes the stakes. It means the people of Point Pleasant weren't dealing with a lost animal, but with an entity that could move with impossible speed and precision. If it could keep up with a car at 100 miles per hour without breaking a sweat, nowhere in the county was truly out of its reach. This realization turned the town's curiosity into a focused kind of dread, leading people to wonder if the creature was wandering, or if it was intentionally tracking them. The sightings stopped being random. It was no longer about seeing something strange in the woods or near the old munitions plant. The creature started coming to where people lived. Connie Carpenter reported that the creature didn't fly past her house. It stopped. For 3 nights in a row, she claims it stood right outside her window, staring in at her. The sightings shifted from the woods to the very edges of people's homes. This repeated, targeted presence suggested the entity was no longer wandering, but specifically watching its victims. A bird or a stray animal might be curious, but this was a repeated, targeted action. It wasn't hunting for food, it was watching a specific person in their own home. Then the phones started ringing. People across Point Pleasant began receiving calls from voices that didn't sound human. They described the voices as mechanical and distorted, like a recording being played through a broken machine. Some of these callers threatened the people on the line and predicted minor events that would actually happen a few days later. When you combine the window sightings with these distorted calls, the nature of the phenomenon changes. It stopped being a biological mystery and started looking like psychological harassment. If this thing could manipulate phone lines or predict the future, it wasn't an animal that had wandered into town. It was something that knew who these people were and how to get inside their heads. As the harassment grew, a different kind of fear settled over the community. Beyond the fear of being watched, there was a feeling of weight. People started reporting dreams and premonitions. They didn't dream of the creature itself, but of disaster. It was a heavy, suffocating sense of impending doom, a feeling that something catastrophic was about to happen to the town. This is where the theory of the harbinger comes in. A harbinger is a sign that something is coming, usually something bad. In many traditions, Seeing a strange omen is a warning to prepare for a tragedy. If the Mothman was a harbinger, then the sightings, the phone calls, and the nightmares weren't attacks. They were alarms. But a warning is only useful if you can understand the message. The people of Point Pleasant were terrified, but they didn't know what they were being warned about. They were looking at the sky and answering their phones, while the real danger might have been right under their feet. The town was trapped in a loop of anxiety. Every red light in the distance, every crackle on a telephone line, and every bad dream felt like a countdown. The creature had moved from the abandoned bunkers of the TNT area into the bedrooms and the subconscious of the townspeople. It had linked its presence to a feeling of inevitable death. The only question left was when the clock would finally run out. Everyone in town was waiting for the other shoe to drop, unaware that the most dangerous place in Point Pleasant wasn't the haunted woods or a dark bedroom, but the main road leading out of town. It was 5:04 on the afternoon of December 15th, 1967. Rush hour was hitting Point Pleasant, and the Silver Bridge was packed with cars crossing the Ohio River. Then, in a matter of seconds, the entire structure gave way. The bridge collapsed, dropping cars and people into the freezing water. 46 people died. For the town, this was more than a freak accident. For over a year, a heavy sense of dread had settled over the community. People had been reporting the creature, the strange noises, and a feeling that something terrible was coming. When the bridge fell, the connection felt immediate. The creature hadn't been hunting people in the TNT area, it had been a herald. In the eyes of those who believed, the Mothman wasn't the cause of the tragedy, but a warning that the disaster was inevitable. When investigators moved in to find out why a massive steel bridge simply vanished from under the cars, they found something that made the tragedy feel even more sinister. They focused on the suspension chains, specifically the eye-bars. An eye-bar is a heavy steel link, shaped like a long rod with a hole at each end, pinned together to hold the weight of the bridge. These are the muscles of a suspension bridge. The investigators discovered that the entire collapse was triggered by a single eye-bar. One piece of steel had failed. When they examined the wreckage, they found a flaw in that bar. It wasn't a massive crack or a rusted-through hole. It was a fracture only 0.1 inches deep. To put that in perspective, 1/10 of an inch is about the thickness of 2 pennies stacked on top of each other. A flaw that small, nearly invisible to the naked eye, had created a weak point. Under the stress of rush hour traffic, that tiny fracture finally snapped, and the rest of the bridge followed in a lethal chain reaction. A flaw that small is almost impossible to find without specialized high-tech inspections that didn't exist in the same way back then. No human inspector walking that bridge would have seen it. No engineer looking at the blueprints would have known it was there. If the flaw was invisible to humans, the collapse was a mathematical certainty but a visual impossibility. It was a hidden death trap waiting for the right moment to spring. This detail fuels the theory that the Mothman was a supernatural observer. If a human couldn't see the crack, but the creature appeared and lingered for a year before the snap, the implication is that the creature could see the invisible. It saw the fracture. It knew the bridge was a ticking clock. If the Mothman was a warning, it raises a possibility. Was the creature trying to save those 46 people, or was it simply drawn to the energy of a coming catastrophe? If it was a warning, why didn't it make itself clearer? Why leave the town in a state of vague, shivering fear instead of pointing directly to the steel? The bridge was gone, and the creature vanished shortly after. But as the town began to mourn, people noticed that the sightings weren't limited to the woods of West Virginia. Other people in other places were reporting the same red eyes right before their own worlds fell apart. December 15th, 1967, 5:40 in the afternoon. Rush hour in Point Pleasant. The Silver Bridge is packed with cars moving between West Virginia and Ohio. Then, in a matter of seconds, the steel gives way. The bridge drops into the icy water of the Ohio River, taking 46 people with it. The official investigation found the culprit was a single corroded eye bar. It was a structural flaw that had been there since the bridge was built in 1928. One piece of metal fatigued, it snapped, and the whole system failed. As the town began to mourn and the wreckage was cleared, something happened in the TNT area. The sightings stopped. For 13 months, the creature had been a constant, terrifying presence. It had chased cars at 100 miles per hour, stared into bedroom windows, and haunted the concrete igloos of the old munitions plant. But the moment the bridge hit the water, the Mothman vanished. Not a single credible report of the creature surfaced after that day. It didn't move to a neighboring town. It didn't fade away slowly. It simply ceased to exist in Point Pleasant. This sudden silence is a strong clue. If the creature were a rare animal or a government experiment, it likely would have stayed in the area or been spotted elsewhere. Instead, its presence seems tied to a clock. The Mothman appeared 13 months before the collapse and disappeared the moment the tragedy occurred. It suggests the creature wasn't a resident of the TNT area, but a visitor whose only purpose was the bridge. John Keel spent months in Point Pleasant trying to map this out. He didn't think he was looking at a cryptid or a mutation. He began documenting other cases from around the world to look for a pattern, finding reports of winged figures appearing before earthquakes, mine collapses, and massive building fires. In Keel's research, these are harbingers. A harbinger is essentially a warning sign. In old stories, it's a crow or a black dog that appears before a death. Keel argued that the Mothman was a high-strung version of this, an entity from another dimension or a different state of reality, drawn to locations of impending disaster. To Keel, the creature wasn't trying to hunt the people of Point Pleasant. It was reacting to a future event, acting as a biological alarm system that humans didn't know how to read. When you look at the Silver Bridge itself, the idea of a single, catastrophic warning starts to make sense. Most suspension bridges are built with high redundancy. The Brooklyn Bridge, for example, uses thousands of individual steel wires. If one wire snaps, thousands more hold the load, and the bridge doesn't fall. But the Silver Bridge was different. It had low redundancy, meaning it relied on just a few critical eye bars per link. It was uniquely vulnerable. One single point of failure could bring the whole thing down. There's a symmetry there. The bridge had one single point of failure, and the town had one single, recurring warning. The Mothman didn't appear in a dozen different spots across the state. It hovered around the TNT area and the river, mirroring the fragile nature of the bridge's design. If the bridge was a ticking time bomb with one broken part, the creature was the sound of the clock ticking. Of course, we have to ask why we see a man-sized bird with glowing red eyes. Why that specific image? The sightings peaked in the mid-60s, a time when pop culture was saturated with specific imagery. The Batman TV series was a massive hit, featuring colorful, campy villains. One of those characters was Killer Moth, a winged criminal. The press quickly jumped on the Mothman name, and once that label was out there, it created a template. It's a known psychological effect. Once a community has a name for something, witnesses often subconsciously adjust their descriptions to fit. If the newspapers call it a Mothman, a witness who saw a gray winged shape might suddenly remember it having antennae or moth-like wings. The red eyes, the gray skin, the humanoid shape, these details might have been filtered through the lens of 1960s comic books and television. But even if the moth part was a cultural projection, it doesn't explain the timing. It doesn't explain why 100 people saw something that disappeared the second 46 people died. If we accept the harbinger theory, we have to consider a world where time isn't a straight line. This would be a creature that doesn't see the present, but feels the weight of a future tragedy. To this entity, the collapse of the Silver Bridge wasn't something that happened in December 1967. It was a massive, psychic rupture in the environment radiating backward in time for over a year. The creature wasn't predicting the future. It was simply attracted to the site of a disaster that, from its perspective, had already happened. In that scenario, the Mothman wasn't a monster. It was a witness. It spent 13 months screaming a warning into a void, gliding alongside cars and staring at people, trying to signal a catastrophe that no one believed in until the steel actually snapped. Point Pleasant still holds a festival every year to remember the creature. They treat it as a mascot now, a piece of local color, but for the people who were there in 1966, it wasn't a festival. It was a feeling of impending doom that didn't leave until the river took the bridge. The Mothman really was a warning system. It suggests something about the rest of the world. If these creatures appear before earthquakes and mine collapses, they are still out there, appearing in other places at other times. They're gliding over roads and staring through windows in towns that don't yet know they're in danger. So, the next time you're driving through a quiet area and you see something large and gray gliding just above the tree line, or you catch a glimpse of two red reflectors in the darkness where there are no cars, you have to wonder, is it just a bird, or is something nearby about to break? You enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Sleepwalk Files to stay up to date with new mysteries and long videos to fall asleep to every night.